You never expected things to end up here. They probably didn't expect it either. Yet somehow, both of you have arrived at the same place. Complete silence. No phone calls, no messages, no random check-ins pretending to care when the intention behind them was never clear. Just nothing. Many people watching from the outside assume silence means everything is finally calm. They believe it means the chapter has closed, both people are moving forward, and the emotional storm is finally over. But that assumption misses what is happening underneath. When you and a narcissist become silent at the same time, something much deeper begins to unfold. The outside world sees stillness, but internally, two completely different emotional battles are taking place. And one of those battles can eventually reveal something you never expected. For you, the silence is felt almost immediately. It does not simply exist around you. It feels like something sitting heavily inside you. You notice your phone more often. You catch yourself checking it without even thinking. Your mind remembers the old patterns, the constant explaining, the endless attempts to fix things, the moments where you had to defend your feelings or prove your intentions. The absence of that emotional noise can feel strangely overwhelming because chaos had become familiar. This reaction does not mean you are weak or unable to move on. It means your nervous system became accustomed to a certain emotional cycle. You were trained to respond, react, and stay engaged. When you suddenly stop participating, your mind and body need time to adjust to the unfamiliar quiet. But the narcissist's first reaction to your silence is usually very different from yours. In the beginning, they may not experience the same emotional heaviness you are feeling. They might not immediately feel the emptiness or the longing that you feel. Instead, their first reaction can be much more subtle, a small feeling of annoyance, confusion, or disruption. Something in their usual routine has changed. The person who was once available, responsive, and emotionally engaged is suddenly no longer providing the same reaction. At first, they may not interpret this as a major loss. It may simply feel like an inconvenience or an unexpected change they did not plan for. But that small disturbance is often the beginning of something much bigger happening internally. As time passes, that initial irritation can begin to grow into something more uncomfortable for them. The calm and confidence they display on the outside may start to become harder to maintain internally. A narcissist often depends heavily on external validation to support the image they have created about themselves. They need reactions, attention, and emotional responses from others to reinforce their sense of importance. You are not just another person in their life. You are also a source of reflection. Your reactions showed them that they had influence, that they could affect your emotions, and that they still held a certain level of control. When you become silent, that reflection disappears. And without that constant feedback, the image they carefully created about being powerful, untouchable, and always in control can begin to weaken. Silence can create a situation where the narcissist is forced to face something they usually avoid: uncertainty. When they no longer receive your reactions, they cannot easily measure their impact on you. They cannot tell if you are still waiting, still attached, or finally walking away. That unknown can become deeply uncomfortable for someone who is used to controlling the emotional direction of a relationship. They may appear completely unaffected from the outside, but internally they can become focused on understanding what has changed. The question that starts repeating in their mind is often not simply whether they miss you, but whether they still have access to you. They want to know if the connection is still available whenever they decide to return. As the silence continues from hours into days, their attention may shift toward watching, analyzing, and trying to understand your behavior. They may not openly show emotion, but internally, they can become much more alert. They begin wondering whether your silence is temporary or permanent. Are you trying to get their attention, or have you genuinely detached? Did you finally reach a point where you no longer need their approval? For someone who has relied on feeling in control, the possibility that you have truly stepped away can create a major internal disturbance. The silence becomes powerful because it removes the certainty they once had. They are no longer able to predict your next move, and that unpredictability challenges the dynamic they were comfortable with. After several days of genuine silence, many narcissists may attempt to reconnect. However, the return often does not come in the form of a direct acknowledgement of what happened. Instead, it may arrive wrapped in familiarity and emotion. They might send a message that appears harmless, something nostalgic or casual, something designed to reopen the emotional door without taking responsibility for what caused the distance. It could be a simple statement about missing you, a reminder of a shared memory, or words that sound close to an apology, but avoid admitting any real wrongdoing. These messages can feel powerful because they touch the part of you that wanted understanding and closure. But beneath the surface, they may be testing whether the connection is still available. If you remain silent even after that attempt, the emotional balance can begin to shift even further. The person who once felt certain that they could return whenever they wanted may start experiencing a level of discomfort they are not used to facing. Someone who has spent a long time maintaining control can find uncertainty extremely difficult to tolerate. The confidence, the distance, and the appearance of not caring are often not signs of true emotional strength. They can be protective behaviors built around avoiding vulnerability and losing control. Your silence challenges that protection because it creates a situation where they cannot force a reaction from you. For perhaps the first time in a long time, they are faced with a reality they cannot easily manipulate. When the narcissist can no longer access your attention, that uncomfortable emotional state inside them often searches for another outlet. Instead of sitting with the emptiness, they may begin looking for new sources of validation. Suddenly, they may become more engaged with people they previously ignored. They might reconnect with old friends, reach out to relatives they had distanced themselves from, or move faster with another person they had kept around casually. But this is not necessarily a sign that they have healed or found genuine peace. It can be an attempt to cover the discomfort they are experiencing. They are not replacing what you gave because they finally understood its value. They are trying to avoid feeling the absence of it. The stronger they try to appear on the outside, the more it can reveal their need to escape what is happening internally. While they are searching for distractions, something very different begins happening within you. Your nervous system, which may have spent months or even years trapped in a cycle of stress, uncertainty, and emotional alertness, slowly begins to settle. This healing process does not always feel like relief in the beginning. Sometimes peace feels uncomfortable because your mind became familiar with constant tension. You may experience moments of emptiness and mistake them for proof that you still need that person. But what you are feeling is not always love or a sign that you should return. Often, it is your brain adjusting after being attached to an intense emotional pattern. Your body is learning that it no longer has to remain in survival mode. Beneath that discomfort, something important is rebuilding. As the silence continues, you begin reconnecting with parts of yourself that were pushed aside. The constant questioning starts becoming quieter. The need to analyze every word, every action, and every change in their behavior slowly loses its grip. The confusion that surrounded the relationship begins to clear because the source of that emotional instability is no longer constantly present. You start seeing situations with more honesty and less fear. Your own perspective begins returning. The version of yourself that existed before the relationship, before the doubts and emotional exhaustion, starts becoming visible again. This is one of the most powerful things silence can create. It does not just separate you from another person. It creates space for you to reconnect with your own identity. When the silence reaches several weeks, the internal discomfort for the narcissist can become even harder for them to ignore. Every day that passes without your reaction represents another reminder that the dynamic has changed. But this does not always lead to self-reflection or genuine accountability. A narcissist often does not respond to losing someone by looking deeply within themselves and asking difficult questions. Instead, they may attempt to escape the discomfort by searching for something else to restore their sense of importance. They look for another person who can provide attention, admiration, and emotional reassurance. They search for another reflection of the identity they want to maintain. The loss does not necessarily inspire transformation because real transformation requires facing the parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. This is why your absence was never about proving your value to them. It was never about making them finally understand everything they did wrong. Their ability to change was never determined by how perfectly you loved them, how patiently you explained yourself, or how many chances you gave. Deep personal change only happens when someone chooses to confront themselves honestly. And for a narcissistic person, that confrontation can feel more threatening than losing any individual relationship. Looking inward means facing insecurities, weaknesses, and uncomfortable truths that their entire emotional defense system was designed to protect them from. But the most important thing happening during this silence is not what is happening to them. It is what is happening within you. You are rebuilding a connection that may have been damaged over time. The connection with your own thoughts, your own instincts, and your own understanding of reality. You are learning to trust yourself again. You are separating your identity from the version of yourself that existed only to manage someone else's emotions. The silence is becoming a place where your confidence returns, your clarity strengthens, and your inner voice becomes louder than the confusion you once carried. What you are creating within yourself is something no one else can control or take away. The moment a person loses access to the attention they were used to receiving, something inside them begins searching for another way to feel stable again. This is why some people quickly move toward new conversations, new connections, or new sources of validation. From the outside, it can look like they have moved on effortlessly. It can look like they are happier, stronger, and completely unaffected. But sometimes what appears to be confidence is actually an attempt to escape discomfort. Staying busy, finding someone new, or surrounding themselves with attention can become a way to avoid facing the emptiness created by losing a familiar emotional connection. The human mind naturally looks for patterns it recognizes. When someone has lived through a relationship filled with uncertainty, emotional highs, and sudden changes, the nervous system can become attached to that cycle. The quiet that follows can feel strange because the body was prepared for the next conflict, the next message, or the next emotional shift. This is why peace can sometimes feel uncomfortable before it begins to feel safe. Your mind is not always missing the person. Sometimes it is adjusting to the absence of the emotional pattern that became familiar. When you spend a long time questioning yourself, explaining your feelings, or trying to understand someone who constantly creates confusion, your connection with your own judgment can become weaker. You may start looking outside yourself for answers instead of trusting what you already know inside. But distance creates something powerful. It gives your mind the space to organize the experiences you once struggled to understand. Slowly, the confusion begins to fade, and you start recognizing things that were difficult to see when you were emotionally involved. The silence also removes the constant reactions that kept the old dynamic alive. Without arguments, explanations, apologies, or attempts to prove your worth, you begin discovering who you are without that pressure. You start realizing that your identity was never supposed to depend on someone else's approval, attention, or ability to understand you. The more you reconnect with yourself, the less power the old dynamic has over your emotions. For some people, losing control over a situation is more painful than losing the relationship itself. This is because control creates a sense of security. When that control disappears, they are forced to face uncertainty, and uncertainty can reveal emotions they normally avoid. Instead of looking inward and asking difficult questions, some people search for external ways to feel powerful again. They may seek attention, admiration, or another connection that gives them the same feeling of importance. But your healing follows a completely different path. You are not trying to replace what happened. You are learning from it. You are rebuilding trust with yourself, reconnecting with your instincts, and creating a stronger understanding of your own value. The silence that once felt painful begins becoming the space where you recover your confidence. What you are gaining is not just distance from another person. You are gaining a deeper relationship with yourself. The longer you remain disconnected from the old cycle, the more you begin to notice changes that once felt impossible. You start seeing the relationship with clearer eyes instead of through the emotions that kept you attached. Moments that once confused you begin to make sense. The things you used to excuse, the behaviors you constantly tried to understand, and the situations where you abandoned your own needs to maintain peace become easier to recognize. This clarity does not arrive because you suddenly stopped caring. It arrives because you finally have enough space to hear your own thoughts without being interrupted by another person's reactions. The silence creates distance, and distance allows you to see the entire picture instead of only focusing on the moments that kept you hoping things would change. At the same time, the person who once depended on your emotional reactions may begin noticing that something has changed. They no longer receive the same access to your thoughts, your energy, or your attention. The version of you who was always available, always explaining, and always trying to repair the connection is no longer showing up in the same way. This change can feel unfamiliar to them because the dynamic they understood has shifted. They may wonder why you are calmer, why you are not responding the way you used to, or why their usual methods no longer create the same reaction. The greatest disruption is not always your absence. Sometimes it is the realization that you are no longer the same person they once had influence over. This is where the power of emotional detachment begins to reveal itself. Detachment does not mean you never cared. It does not mean the memories disappear or that you suddenly become completely unaffected. It means your emotions are no longer controlling your decisions. You can remember someone without feeling forced to return. You can miss someone without believing they are good for you. You can acknowledge the connection existed while still understanding that your peace matters more. This is a level of strength that comes from within because it is not based on getting a reaction from another person. It comes from finally becoming secure in your own understanding. Many people mistake silence as a way to punish someone, but true silence is not about revenge. It is about reclaiming your own energy. It is about stepping away from the constant emotional exchange that kept you trapped in the same patterns. When you stop trying to convince someone of your value, something shifts inside you. You begin realizing that your worth was never something another person could give or take away. The need to be chosen, understood, or validated by them starts losing its control over you. What once felt like a desperate need for their attention slowly becomes something you can observe without being consumed by it. The most difficult part of this journey is accepting that closure does not always come from the other person. Sometimes people spend years waiting for an apology, an explanation, or a moment where the other person finally admits what they did. But your healing cannot depend on someone else reaching a level of awareness they may never reach. Real closure begins when you stop needing someone else to confirm what you experienced. You begin trusting your own memories, your own emotions, and your own understanding of what happened. That is the moment when you stop giving someone else the authority to define your reality. And this is the part that changes everything. The person who once had the ability to completely shift your mood no longer holds the same position in your mind. Their actions may still exist, their choices may still be theirs, but they no longer control your inner world. You begin building a life that is centered around your own peace instead of someone else's approval. The silence that once felt like a loss becomes a foundation. It becomes the place where you rebuild your confidence, restore your identity, and remember that you are always more than the role you played in someone else's story. You were always a complete person before they entered your life, and you remain one after they leave. The deeper you move into this process, the more you begin to understand that the biggest transformation is not about whether the narcissist notices your absence. It is about whether you finally notice yourself again. For so long, your attention may have been focused on decoding their behavior, predicting their reactions, and trying to understand what was happening inside their mind. You spent so much energy looking outward that you slowly disconnected from your own needs. But silence creates a different kind of awareness. It brings your attention back home. You begin asking different questions. Not why did they treat me this way, or will they come back, but why did I accept what hurt me? And what parts of myself did I ignore while trying to hold this together? This shift is where true recovery begins. You stop measuring your progress by whether they reach out, whether they regret losing you, or whether they finally understand your value. Those things may feel important at first, but they are still connected to them. Real freedom comes when your healing is no longer dependent on their actions. Whether they return or disappear forever, your peace remains yours. This is the moment where you take back emotional ownership of your life. You no longer allow someone else's attention, silence, or behavior to determine how you see yourself. The relationship may have affected you, but it does not get to define you. One of the hardest things to accept is that some people only recognize your value when they no longer have easy access to you. When you were constantly available, your presence may have felt guaranteed. Your patience, your understanding, and your willingness to keep trying may have become something they expected rather than appreciated. But when that access disappears, the dynamic changes. They are no longer interacting with the version of you who would always return, always explain, and always give another chance. They are confronted with the reality that someone they believed they could influence has started choosing themselves. This is why your growth can feel so powerful. You are no longer fighting for a place in someone else's world. You are creating a stronger place in your own. The energy you once spent trying to prove your love, loyalty, and worth begins returning to you. You start investing that energy into your goals, your friendships, your health, your confidence, and your future. The parts of yourself that became smaller in order to keep the relationship alive begin expanding again. You remember the person you were before the confusion, before the emotional exhaustion, and before you started questioning whether your feelings were valid. Eventually, the silence stops feeling like an empty space and starts feeling like protection. It becomes the boundary between the old version of your life and the new one you are creating. You begin understanding that not every connection is meant to be restored. Some connections are meant to teach you something about your own strength, your own limits, and your own value. The lesson is not that you were foolish for caring. The lesson is that caring for someone else should never require abandoning yourself. Love should never demand that you constantly sacrifice your peace just to keep another person comfortable. And perhaps the most unexpected realization is that you do not need to become cold to become strong. You do not need to stop feeling, stop caring, or stop believing in love. Strength is not becoming emotionless. Strength is being able to feel deeply while still protecting yourself. It is knowing that someone can matter to you and still not be healthy for you. It is understanding that missing someone does not always mean you should return to them. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is walking away from the very thing your heart keeps asking you to hold on to. That is when silence becomes more than distance. It becomes the moment you finally choose yourself.